right, thank you. I love giving talks. Thank you for allowing me to do this. Some information will be slightly over the boundaries of this system because we have some kind of technical problem, but that's okay. You have me to explain it to you, to let you know what I'm trying to say. I want to talk about the future of the testing role. This is a very important topic these days. I'm working with a mid-size, fast-growing, software-intensive company right now. You know what I'm talking about. You go into this place and there's no offices and not enough conference rooms. The conference rooms are always booked, always full, because the architect didn't think anyone would ever have a loud voice like I have, and you can just talk and everyone wants to hear what you say all the time, which I wish was true, but it turns out. I visited this famous Agile place in Germany. Within 30 seconds, I'm getting shushed. And I'm like, dude, I thought you liked the open plan office because you want to hear what everybody has to say who's on the team, right? Then everybody's got earbuds because they're desperately trying to create private spaces for themselves. Anyway, this place is full of open plan everything. It's walls full of Post-its and things that are like Post-its, and everything's a whiteboard wall. I love that. They use Jira. They're obsessed with Jira. Everything is on Jira. I kind of like that because Jira, when you first encounter it, you go, oh my God, I hate this. But it's the kind of tool that you can get used to. It's kind of like if you're a vegan, you go like, ooh, fast food. But within 3 days, you can get really used to it, even if you're a vegan. And you're going like, oh man, I can't do without my French fries now. And it takes a long time to get off that habit. I assume that heroin is the same way. I imagine. I haven't had that experience. So they use Jira intensively. And they have this belief, as many companies have, that like, do we really need testers? I guess we have testers, but they're sort of ambivalent about testers. And I think the testers sense that the Agile world has always been ambivalent about testers. There's not a place in Agile, original recipe Agile, for testers. As Kem Kainer says, one of the first things Agile did was fire all the testers. Why did they do that? Because they didn't understand testers. They had only worked with bad testers. And the people who created Agile were all developers. So they just saw testers as one of those bean counter other people that we can probably optimize them away. You don't really need accountants in the world. They just get in the way, right? You don't really need regulators in the world, right? They just keep us from storing our chemicals where we want to store them, and that harshes our buzz. There's all kinds of things where if you're a certain kind of person, you're not in the business of caring why we need those kinds of people. But if you're in a different world, then you know why we need those kinds of people. Sometimes the world is like that. So basically, look, Agile was created by developers, not by testers. And they had experiences with bad testing. And actually, I created my whole testing methodology by having experience with bad testers. And I was reacting against bad testers too. But I didn't want to destroy all testing. I wanted to raise the craftsmanship level of testing and to make testing better. So now we have to deal with this legacy from the earliest days where Agile said, testing is a specialty. We shouldn't have specialties. By the way, everyone should specialize in programming. There's something wrong with that. Everyone should you've got to have good programmers, duh. So that means everyone's got to learn to program. Everyone's got to be a coder. To me, that does not add up at all. What they're really saying is, we're programmers, everyone should be like us. It's not there should be no specialists. It's we're programmers, everyone should be like us, which is just ethnocentrism again. It's an us and them thing. But having said that, there's some really good things about this from a testing point of view. The idea that, well, everybody should test. Everybody should care about testing. Everybody should care about quality. It's the whole team's responsibility. Yes, I like that idea. I like the idea of everybody working together. So let's stop saying that's not my job. I don't do that because it's not my job. Okay, I like that part. But unfortunately, in real life, if you're going to get good at something, you really need to practice and focus. That's why I'm not a race car driver. Because I kind of like to be a race car driver. But although I have driven a car for decades, I have never studied driving. So I have lots of experience, but I am not an artisan car driver, you see. I've also been a professional programmer for more than 30 years, 33 years, that I've been paid to write software in some form or another. And yet, even today, I would say, I would never get up on a stage at a development conference and say, here's how you should name your variables, because I know. Instead, I go, I probably do okay, but I'm sure I have a lot to learn about naming variables. Not because it takes 33 years to learn it and I'm stupid. It's because I've never bothered to learn it because I don't care. But I would care if my core only job was developing production code. Then I would care a lot, and I would try to be the best I could be, and I would want to be a samurai of coding. But I chose a different path. I am a software tester, and I love software testing, and I love it so much that I have gotten into depths of software testing lore and skill that seem bizarre to most other people. They don't understand why I recommend books like Seeing Like a State. You should read a book called Seeing Like a State. Why? It's a book about how nation states attempt to control things by measuring them, and in so doing, completely screw things up. Well, what does that have to do with testing? It has everything to do with testing. Because management is constantly putting pressure on testers to make their work legible. Now, I bet you've never heard the word legible used in that context, but this is a powerful concept. The concept of legibility is the concept of, can other people read what your situation is? Can outsiders read your situation? That's what legibility is. So it's an extension of the obvious everyday idea of, can I read what my doctor wrote on the prescription? Is, can authorities read the status of tax-paying citizens so they can figure out who owes taxes? And for many years they couldn't. Actually, the development of first and last names in the Western world was all about taxing people. People didn't used to have fixed names, like I'm William the long-haired guy, that's how I'm known. And, well, we don't know if you owe any taxes because there's like 3 William long-haired guys in your area, and we don't know who owes the taxes. So that's one reason why they force people to have fixed names. This book is fascinating, how it talks about the imposition of order onto an unorderly system and how that has really hurt systems, human social systems, by doing that. So here, I've just gotten you into some little detail, and some of you here are going like, isn't he supposed to talk about testing and the role of testing? Why is he talking about seeing like a state? That's because to be an artisan of testing means to put little root tendrils out in all kinds of fascinating subjects in order to develop a precise and nuanced view of, how do I make my work as a tester, which is inherently abstract? I don't produce something fundamentally that is a thing that I can show you. I produce knowledge, information. I inform you. That's my job. But how do we grab onto that? How do I make what I do legible to you? And if I can't make it legible to you, will you think there's nothing there? And if you think there's nothing there, will you fire me? Will you fire my kind? Will you say, we don't need those people, they don't do anything? And that brings us back to the future of the role of the software tester. Because I'm going to tell you right now, one of the things you got to do if you want to save our craft, dear testers, is we got to make our work legible to people who are non-testers. We have to be ready to explain it, and we need to display it to them in a way that doesn't denigrate our own work. And if you try to turn your work into little bricks called test cases, you're dumbing down your work, unfortunately. It does make it legible, but it also destroys the concept of testing. To say, my testing project is just a matter of running these 1,600 test cases. Then people say, well, we don't need you anymore. We're going to give these 1,600 test cases to someone who costs a lot less than you, and it'll be exactly the same, won't it? Well, no, it won't be the same. Why? You just said that this was your work. It was 1,600 test cases. It wasn't 1,600 test cases plus lots of judgment and skill. It was 1,600 test cases, so we don't need you. And trying to get good test documentation that pleases management, we can accidentally talk ourselves out of having a job. And I think that has a lot to do with the incredible outsourcing trend that kicked in around the year 2000 and led to this incredible loss of testing jobs in the United States and in Europe. So the stakes here are, do we get to even have a craft? Do we get to even have a job? We've really got to get good at understanding our role if we're going to have a future. This is the PDF with all this stuff in it. You can get to via this QR code, which has the link to my Dropbox. All right, now let me introduce you to Mr. Deep and Mr. Wide. Okay, I'm a specialist. I'm a generalist. Okay, all right, let's examine that. Let's examine that in the dimensions of energy, dependability, skill, and attitude. Now, the specialist, his attitude is, I'm dedicated, responsible, skilled, and caring. But that generalist guy, the guy who says, I'm a member of the team, I don't have any fixed job, I just do goodness all day. He's distracted, unreliable, incompetent because he never learns his craft, and doesn't really care about testing. Meanwhile, if you put yourself in the shoes of the generalist and you look at the specialist, you get this nice little, hey, I, the generalist, I'm available. That tester specialist has always got his head down in some job that he says is so important, you can't ask him to do anything. He doesn't have time. I'm collaborative. I'm versatile. I can do lots of things. I care. Unlike the specialist doesn't care about you. Now, this is a really important relationship, and I would ask you to contemplate this. Where do you stand on this? Where do you live? Are you more of a generalist? Do you see yourself as more of a generalist? Do you see yourself as more of a specialist? It's important to know. And then the next thing it's important to realize is that we can slide this. We can say, okay, so here's the tester. What if the tester is the generalist? From the point of view of the security tester, the generalist tester is that generalist who's incompetent at security testing. The regular tester says, I know a few things about security testing. And the security tester says, yeah, you know about putting some special characters into a search field. Good for you. But I study the CERT vulnerability database every day and read all the updates to it. And I've got a lifetime subscription to 2600 magazine. And I got all the tools. Oh, that's nice. You use Nikto. How 2004 of you. So from that security tester standpoint, if you felt like I'm a specialist because I'm a tester, realize that from someone else's point of view, you're not such a specialist. And that now you can say, and this is exactly what's going to happen in your mind, I predict, because that's what happens in my mind. When I respond to my inner security tester who's criticizing me, I go, yeah, well, okay, I'm not a super security tester. I know something about it, but at least I'm available, collaborative, versatile, right? So if you find yourself being accused of being a generalist, the natural defense is to think of all the great things there are about being a generalist. And if you find yourself accused of being a specialist, you think of all the great things about being a specialist. In other words, they're both wonderful in certain contexts and in certain ways. And I can find no way to peg and say this is right and that is wrong. Instead, I think we can just appreciate this dilemma between, should I specialize because I'm giving something up when I specialize? Or should I not specialize, but I'm giving something up to not specialize too? And it's gonna be a tough question. So there's tester, team member. Then there's agile team member versus entrepreneur. Have you ever encountered those people who, I find them a little insufferable, but I try to be open and pluralistic and appreciate them, where they go, well, I'm not really an agilist, I'm an entrepreneur. Because I don't see teams anymore, I see enterprises. I see customers and their problems, and I solve problems. I don't like labels. I don't label myself. A lot of times that's what they'll say. Like, I don't like to label myself. I just kind of do good. I don't know. Good is a label. whatever level that you choose, you're going to be able to look down or probably look up. Like, I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm a human. Like, how about that? I'm a citizen. How about that? Oh, you're a citizen. How specialized you are in one nationality. Well, I'm a world organism. I don't look down at bacteria. So I'm making little jokes here because that really is what's happening in my head, is I have to wrestle with all these little sarcastic remarks that my own brain is making about me, about my own attitudes. But I think it's healthy. I think it's healthy to go up and down in the levels here, and it loosens you up, and it makes you appreciate that this is a real dilemma, and I can't think of a, quote, right answer here. All I can think of is that I'm going to make a choice about how specialized to be. I'm going to live with that choice, and I'll change the choice if I feel later that it's not working for me. And I'm going to try not to harshly judge people who make other choices. Of course I'm going to judge them because I'm human and I can't help it, but I'm going to try to remind myself in my mind, like, be gentle in the judgment, because anything I'm doing to judge other people, I just imagine it coming right back at me. And so I don't want to poke anyone else harder than I can feel that I want to be poked myself. And this is going to come up when we talk a little bit about in more detail about the testing role. And should there even be a testing role? Let's talk about what makes testing special, really special. Like, what is it that I sat down and said to myself, what is it that I can say is true about testers, but is largely not true about anyone other than testers? And there's not much on that list, but there's a few things. One thing that I can say is that testing is accessible. When I say it's accessible, I mean, if you want to be a programmer, then one thing you have to be able to do is write code that compiles and does something. And that's a step that not everyone is willing to make. Okay? So you can't just drift in and go, oh, just write some code. Oh, it's kind of fun. Maybe I want to do this for a living. It's not going to happen like that. You have to sit. You got to think about logic and be comfortable with logic. You got to learn certain keywords and syntax stuff. Now, of course, if you're sitting with someone who's an expert programmer, they can make that very easy for you. And I've worked with people who don't know anything about coding. Within a few minutes, they started to understand what was on the screen and all that. But what I'm saying about testing is that a child can find an important bug in any product I put in front of them, unless the product is so obscure that you need specialized knowledge as a user even to encounter the product. So like some kind of special radiology calculator system Maybe we can't even get to square one on it without some knowledge of radiology. But you wouldn't need any knowledge of testing, because all humans are testers. All humans are testers. And you would know this, any of you who've read any of the literature about child development and the nature of play. There's some wonderful books out there. There's a book called The Playful Brain, which talks about how rats play and all the history of experimenting on rats, trying to figure out, why do rats play? What does it do for them? And one of the conclusions over the years of experimenting that they've come to is rats playfully fight each other as child rats because they're learning how to get along with other rats as adult rats. They're going to be living in close proximity with adult rats, and they need to stay out of conflict with them. And they need to deal with things that are unpredictable. And rats who have been prevented from playing all through their young rat when they encounter something unexpected, they freak out. Whereas rats that playfully fought other rats as child rats, they encounter unexpected things, and those stress hormones, those cortisoids, or whatever they're called, cortisones, those chemicals don't build up. They get cleaned out really quickly in adult rats that have had a history of playing. And then the book makes the point that this seems to also be happening in other species, and it seems to also be happening in humans. Human children must test their environment. And any parent knows that their toddlers are constantly poking at the environment. Testing, pushing, finding out what happens if you step over certain lines, and then developing based on that. That's all a testing process. Learning language is a testing process. Learning to walk is a testing process. So I would say all people are testers, but then here's a curious thing that happens to kids as they grow. They learn how to get along, and that destroys their testing skills. Because it doesn't destroy them, it causes you to cover them up, to suppress them. Because you learn how not to say things that upset people. And to some degree, I think really good adult testers are people who never learned how to not say things that upset people or don't care as much. I'm one of those people. And if you Google me, you know I have this reputation of I love arguing with people. It's fun and exciting and very pleasurable for me. But I have come to realize that very few other adults have the same internal experience that I have when they argue. I was in this management class once where they went around the room, the instructor said, "Oh, give me one word that comes to mind when you think of conflict." And I was the only one who said, "Fun!" Nobody else said it. They're all like pain and embarrassment. And I'm like, "Fun!" And they're looking at me. And I didn't understand until that moment that I'm weird. But I was one of the very few testers who were in that room. So I don't think it's coincidence that I found my way into testing and I stayed. Lots of people find their way into testing. Not a lot of people stay for 30 years. But I stayed. It's such a comfortable psychological environment for me to say that something might be wrong here. Oh, what a comfortable place to be in. Something might be wrong here. And people going, "Really? Tell us." Instead of "Shut up, negative man," Instead it's "Really? If you see something wrong, please say something." "I will. Thank you. What a great job." So testing is very accessible because anyone can get into it. That doesn't mean anyone can be really good at it, because there's all kinds of special skills, of social skills, are rather sophisticated social skills to be very good at testing in all of its aspects. But certainly anybody can do a little bit of testing, is my point. The second thing that's unique about the testing task is that it is inherently unbounded, which messes with people. It's so hard. People are always saying, "Well, you have to be able to measure if it's done," and whatever. And a lot of my consulting work is just saying no to people. They can't believe I say no to them. I'm a manager. Nobody says no to me. I'm saying no to you. You just paid me to give you good advice, and I'm telling you no We're not going to measurably say that we have for sure completed testing. That's what you need to hear right now, is that you're asking for the impossible. So let's talk about what's possible and how you're going to live with it. You got to learn to live with reality. Unless you're the president, you got to learn to live with reality. And that my job is to help you do that. Because all these things are true. There's no bell that goes off when you find the last bug, like when you finish playing level 1 of, kill all the aliens or whatever, and it says level 1 complete. If they want to make that a realistic game, then they should have you wander forever in the ice caverns, wondering if there is not yet one more alien for me. And you have to press a button that says, I think I'm done. And if you're wrong, you immediately die and you cannot respawn. That's what it should be. That's life, baby. So, the same code might succeed in one situation, but change the data a little bit and suddenly it fails. So you can't just do code coverage. There's some of you here maybe that go like, I'll just measure code coverage, James. Yeah, but you're not measuring data coverage, are you? Because there's an infinitude of sequences of data that you can give it. There's an infinitude, perhaps, of different states. There are formally accessible states. We can talk about those with our formal state models, but there are also states that nobody knows about that hackers discover. Like, hey, when your system gets to this temperature, the clock begins to drift, and I can use that to break into your system. That's not an official state of your system, but it's a real state of your system. Testing is unbounded because I never know for sure all of these things, the status of them. What I have to do is I have to let go of certainty. And that is an emotional and social process, the letting go of certainty. To say, there is no done. Or you could put it this way, there's no complete, but there is done. And what done means is I've decided to stop working on it. That's what done means. I've decided to stop working on it. That's okay. You can decide to stop working on something. But it's very different to say, I decided to stop working on it because there's no more work to do, and I am sure of it. You don't know there's no more work to do, but you absolutely need to make a decision to stop working on it at some point. And you need to take responsibility for that. And that's okay. It's okay to be wrong about that. You learn and you grow and you get better. But boy, so many people just don't want to hear that. They want to hear like, what is the spreadsheet that you can give me, James, the testing consultant, that tells me the optimum point at which to say that we have finished? How many of you work in environments that use acceptance criteria as a basis for saying that testing a certain story? You had that acceptance criteria? Yeah. I'll bet you, if I were to look at your acceptance criteria, I would say, these aren't acceptance criteria. These are descriptions of your features. That's all they are. And I bet that that's true because I have not yet seen anyone label anything acceptance criteria that was actually acceptance criteria. These are the criteria. If these criteria are met, we will say that it is accepted, and we are saying it's accepted because we have really good reason to believe that it is acceptable. Some of you have acceptance criteria that would say things like this. If the software can do this, like, wait, hold on. That's a completely anti-testing thing to say. The software can do this. That's like saying if this suspect is capable of not murdering someone, if you've seen at least one time where they didn't murder someone, they're innocent of murder. Wait, that's not the way it works. I don't look at someone and say, this person can't be a murderer because I spent 15 minutes with him and he didn't murder me. But that's what it is when you say, I saw it, it got the report, it showed me the report, quick, accept it before we find a bug in it. Instead, what you should say is, we're done, and I accept it when I've tested it in a reasonable way. That's the universal acceptance criteria, is after I test this to a reasonable degree, which is impossible to define, but we can build a case for that and make a persuasive case that we've tested it enough based on talking about risks and all that stuff, at that point we will accept it. Not that it displays a certain behavior. That is the antithesis of testing, to say once it displays a certain behavior, that must mean it's good. You don't need any testing at all if that's what you really believe. Because surely you can create something that one time in one situation is going to do something that's acceptable. So we live in a world that constantly wants to pretend that things are bounded even though they're not bounded. And that's something that's special about testing. Our critical perspective is special about testing. Everybody else focuses on success. Everyone else focuses. We are the only people who focus on failure. Everyone else says, like, let's create quality, let's do something great, let's produce something wonderful. My job is to go, maybe you'll fail. And people go, oh, what a horrible thing to think. I'm paid to think that. That's exactly why we have TSA people with metal detectors and all that. Do you want them to go, come on, folks, let's have another flight where no one blows things up. All right, let's go. Everyone just come through. We don't need a metal detector. Having a metal detector just assumes that there's going to be terrorism. And that negative thought probably creates the violence. So let's just think positive. Just don't let anybody think anything negative, and then everything's going to be okay. Here's the weird thing about that. If you did that, if we just got rid of security in airplanes, most airplanes, most of the time, would not blow up. And then people will go, see, positive thinking works. Also, if you get rid of all smoke alarms, you'll realize, hey, we didn't burn down the place. Oh, we don't need smoke alarms. It was always a hoax. And you could go years and not have smoke alarms until something burns down, and then you realize, oh, maybe we should have smoke alarms, I guess. So that's a tough thing about testing, is we need to have our critical perspective, but there's always someone who says, let's just do an experiment. For 5 minutes, let's think positive and see if we're hit by lightning. Oh, we're not hit by lightning, so therefore we never needed anyone to think critically about anything. They will deny that. And we need to say why it is that the critical perspective is so vital. And here's the thing. The critical perspective can't easily coexist with the positive perspective. They hate each other. The positive perspective, it's so annoyed by negative talk. It's a totally different way of thinking. It's a constructive, building, here's what's possible way of thinking. And yet the negative thinking mode finds it so easy to think, well, you could get hit by a meteor, you could get hit by a bus. Yes, we could, but it won't happen. I have faith that it won't happen. It probably won't happen. Yeah, but it could happen. It could happen. So the negative thinking mode pushes out the positive thinking mode. The positive thinking mode pushes out the negative thinking mode. There's an inherently different vibe, different process, different kinds of probabilistic biases that are coming into those things. And we've got to deal with that. And that's unique about testing. And I think a big part of how we can be valuable as testers is because we're not burdened by the need to build anything. We can just get really good at looking for problems and not say, well, but I have to spend half my time trying to prevent there from being problems. So I'm going to be a cheerleader half the time in favor of the team, and then I'm going to be essentially a cheerleader in favor of things getting in the way of the team, because that's how you feel. It's kind of odd. It's not, as a tester, it's not that I want things to go wrong. When you ever see a tester high-fiving another tester when they find a big bug, it's not because it's like, yeah, that stupid developer. Now he knows how worthless he is. That's not why we're doing it, developers. That's not why we're doing it. When you see two testers high-five each other, yeah, big bug, woohoo, it's because we're saying to ourselves, we're useful today. Because it's really, most of the time as a tester, the better the developers are, the more time I spend wondering, what am I here for anyway? What does it matter what I do? He never makes a mistake. I want him to make a mistake, but I don't want him to make a mistake. You know what I mean? I feel useful. And you know, it's a normal bit of human psychology that I'm sure that firefighters feel this when they see like a building burn down. They go like, well, I didn't want that building to burn down, but doesn't it make you happy that I'm a firefighter? Huh? You want to give me a raise or something, or build a new firehouse? But I'm not to say that it's, you know, a good thing that the fire happened, but at the same, it's really a weird kind of emotional dilemma that you go through when your job is to fight bad things. You also secretly kind of hope enough bad things will keep happening so that people will value you. That's the point. My objective, unlike the objective end of anyone else on the team, is to inform my client. I am trying to create an informed clientele. I imagine potential risk. I analyze actual risk with my provocative experiments. I report that risk in a helpful way. I am the headlights of the software project. Now, this is the graphic I used. And then I was looking at my slides later and I thought, this is the wrong graphic to use. Headlights in your eyes, maybe not the best metaphor for testing. Let's turn that around. That's more what I'm talking about. It's not like I can't understand anything because the test report is blinding me. Instead, or I'm the bug. No. There, see, let's not hit that deer. That's the idea, really. It's the better graphic. So that's thinking about risk. Will people misunderstand that graphic? I prefer to be called tester. There's a little bit of identity politics, I suppose, and all that stuff. I feel that tester is appropriately humble. Sometimes people don't think tester is good because it sounds unskilled or something, and I go like, no, it sounds humble. I want to have that humility come in because I don't have much humility in my life, so I'll put it in my title, tester, instead of tester engineer extraordinaire or tester QA super duper Excellion or whatever. And I always am nervous saying QA. I only use the term QA because other people use it and they seem to be upset if I don't use it. But I really don't, I feel like QA is kind of what all management on a project is QA. They're all there to especially the leaders. You know, the leaders of the project are there to make sure that quality is assured. Just like I, as a parent with a small child, I don't have a small child anymore, but when I did, my job was to assure the quality of that child's experience, my son's experience as he went through the world, and to clear obstacles and all that sort of thing. So to me, testing is a specific kind of activity that almost everyone, when they say QA, they really mean testing. It's just, it doesn't sound grandiose enough for them, so they've got to do other things. So I identify as a tester, and I want there to be a role for testers. I am a testing specialist. That's not to say that other people can't be testers. And here's one way that I try to deal with these issues is in the company I'm working with right now that I mentioned at the top that does all JIRA stuff, and they have something like 75 full-time testers. But what we say, we define testing and what a tester is inside that company as someone who is doing testing is a tester. So anyone is a tester to the degree they're doing testing, or at the moment they're doing testing. So all the developers are testers when they're testing. And I would call that person a tester at the moment that the testing is happening, and I want to say a tester does this, a tester does that, then I'm referring to the developer at that moment. But that's different than being a testing specialist. So we distinguish between a tester and a testing specialist. I find that a useful distinction because I think it really is important to get other people involved in testing. It is a very accessible thing, and lots of other people who are not testing specialists can help me be a better tester, and I want to invite them in. But I also don't want to scare them away with too high expectations of what I expect them to do. Meanwhile, I do have high expectations of testing specialists. If you're going to call yourself a testing specialist, you're saying, I'm going to operate at a high level. So what is unique about good testing specialists? We test deeply and reliably. That's our special thing. We test deeply and reliably. Now, here's the thing. I had this, I frequently have conversations with people about testing that are a little frustrating, but I had one particular frustrating conversation which led to a kind of an insight that I want to share with you now. I'm talking to a guy on a DevOps team who writes what he calls automated test cases, and I would call automated checks, because I don't put the word testing on non-human processes. To me, testing is a human process. But you can automate fact-checking, and that is a powerful, wonderful thing to do. I think we can use all kinds of automation to automatically gather thousands of facts about the product. I want that, so I'm not against that sort of thing. I'm just against confusing that with all of the things a human does called testing, because as soon as you do that, what happens is people say we don't need testers anymore, because all they are people who push buttons on these fact checks. So I'm talking to this guy, and he's a bright kid, and he's saying, oh, testing is so easy, testing is so easy. And I'm like, oh, testing is hard, come on, man. Oh, I don't know what you're talking about, it's just easy, I just picked it up so quickly. And then I realized what was happening. And a picture emerged in my mind, and here's the picture. Here's testing is easy guy, here's testing is hard guy. All right? And under the water, here's the bottom of the sea that drops off down here. Now you can't see because it's cut off, but down at the bottom here, it goes way down. There's a little treasure chest down here, and or there's going to be. Yeah, it just got dropped down. There's a little treasure chest here and a treasure chest there. Now these are sharks. Now you can't really see the effect because it's cut off, but there's all kinds of blood in the water, and I just spent hours making that CGI. Just this part you can't see so much. But see, this is what I realized was happening. What I realized was happening is I'm like a deep sea technical diver, capable of operating 300 feet below the surface to excavate shipwrecks. And I've got all kinds of like special triox compound and incredible equipment and Kevlar, this and that. And I'm talking to someone who says, diving's easy. And all he ever does is he wades around in 4 feet of water, and he's got this little like broken snorkel. And he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. It's just so easy. And I realized it's because he is in a situation where good testing is just checking. It's really very little that needs to be done. He was in a low-risk situation with his project, and he proved it to me. I was trying to find where his testing was going wrong because he was only thinking about it in a shallow way. And what he demonstrated to me, to my satisfaction, is he's doing fine. He doesn't need to do anything complicated here because the technical risks he's dealing with are minimal. So to do deep testing would be gratuitous, obsessive, unnecessarily expensive. They don't need someone like that. It's like you cut your finger, you put a Band-Aid on it. You don't need, to call a surgeon every time, right? So this is one of the dilemmas, is I've developed myself over the years into someone who, you give me any testing problem, and I believe I can handle it as well as anyone else can in the world, unless there's someone who absolutely specializes in that exact kind of testing and that exact kind of technology, then maybe they'll be better than me. But I would still say yes to the challenge of any arbitrarily complicated thing that you want me to do. And that's what 30 years perspective and of knowing myself. That's what you get as an older technical guy. You get that. You don't need that if you're on a DevOps project with just doing simple stuff comparatively. So we have to keep this in mind. Dedicated testers test more deeply and more reliably, but that might not be called for on your project. It might be that there's not a market for highly skilled testers in great numbers. But I would argue that there is a market, or ought to be as we educate the market, a market for highly skilled testers in small numbers. And fortunately, there's only a few people that want to be really highly skilled testers. So I don't think there's ever going to be a whole lot of competition for that. But I'm trying to create that market for testing craftsmanship, where the testing craftspeople can anchor a testing strategy and then draw other people into it who are not testing craftspeople, who have other things that they do, or maybe they're just junior people. And that they can be orchestrated by sophisticated test leads who know how to work this stuff. Another thing that we're able to do is we can explain and defend our testing. That's what's special about a testing specialist. Anybody can do testing, a child can do testing, but a child cannot write a test report or even say a test report. And one of the things that I keep encountering as I go to these Agile shops is people say things like, oh yeah, I tested that. And I go, okay, explain your test strategy. And they go, what do you mean test strategy? Well, how did you test it? Well, I wrote test cases. Well, okay, what were the design principles that guided your test case? And they'll say things like, well, in one case the guy said, well, I tested everything. Okay, all right. Well, what does everything mean? Like, it cannot be described, it must be felt, and it breaks into a Broadway song. Let it go or something. So, and sometimes when I challenge people on this, they get really upset. They go like, why are you yelling at me? You're so critical. Like, my job is to evaluate the test process. I was hired by your management to do it, so I'm going to ask you some questions about your work. And you can answer them or you cannot answer them. But if you don't answer them, that tells me something about your work. You challenge my testing, I will give you an earful. You might want to get some popcorn and a chair, because I will go on and on and on explaining the ins and outs. The first thing I'll say to you is it true? Has someone come to my cave who wishes to know my secrets? Oh, thank the gods! Finally, someone to talk to, someone interested. I will share with you all that I know. And then by then, they've run out of the front of the cave. That is one way that this is how you know the day you become a craftsman or a craftswoman or whatever you want to call yourself. This is how you know the day you become that, is when you're really eager for someone to criticize your work, because you've got so much to say if they do. Like, oh, have you considered this or that? Or that's a good point, but let me tell you why I did it that way. And then maybe you can see the dilemma I was in. Like, oh, okay. Oh, my God. This person's just obsessed with how they work. You can find this with developers. You go to a development conference and they all want to talk about, like, should I use a closure or a recursive calciton or whatever, and the singleton pattern, or like, what do you think? I'm like, oh my God, I'm in the wrong place. I'm not an artisan developer. I just write code. And they'll go, cute, you just write code. Okay, you're not really a craftsman of coding then, are you, James? Because you don't know the terms and you can't defend yourself when someone says, compare this code to that code and tell me where this one would be better to do and where that one would be better to do in the context of PHP virtual servers or something like that. But I can do that when it comes to testing, and I pride myself on doing that. So I know I have a specific way of giving test reports. I give 3-level test reports, which is just a simple pattern of test reporting. But anytime I give a test report, I'm always going to give a 3-level report. I'm going to tell you about the status of the product. I'm going to tell you about what I did to test the product. How did I find the status? And I'm going to give you information about why you should think that the process that I used was a reasonable process. So I'm going to talk about risk. I'm going to talk about my activity, and then I'm going to talk about the status of the product, which is why you hired me to begin with. I'm also able to understand and advocate for testability. I would argue that if you are going to be a professional, excellent tester, then you should be able to lecture about testability, advocate for testability, talk about testability in specific terms. Like, I want to talk about logging. Please give me a functional log. Build it into your software. Because I don't want to have to remember what I tested. I want to ask the product, hey, product, when I was testing you, do you remember what I did with you? And I want the product to go, you did these things. You touched all these functions. Thanks, product. That saves me from having to take a bunch of notes. That saves me from having to have a recording tool that records everything. I can just have it all logged. But of course, if they don't build those logs in, or they don't give me access to those logs, then that means it's a little harder for me to do the testing I want to do. I also want access to different levels of the product. I want to be able to separate pieces of the product from each other. So if I have a problem, I want to be able to say, well, let me just test this unit by itself. And I need to have the infrastructure that lets me separate that unit and feed the results in so I can say, oh, okay, so the problem's not there. The problem's over here. So that when I write the bug report, I'm writing a bug report that's properly targeted. I want developers, I want managers, when they see that my name is on a bug report, to take it very seriously, because this guy doesn't write bad bug reports. I run a class where I have people write formal bug reports and I review them as if I'm a manager. One thing I found very fascinating is that if a student writes one bad bug report, there's a part of me that just doesn't want to read any of their other bug reports. And I figure if it's happening to me and I'm teaching a testing class, imagine what it must be like for people who don't care about testers. They, I think, can come to a terrible opinion of you very quickly and then turn down the volume on anything you're saying if even one time they look at a bug report and they go, I don't know what you're trying to say. Where are the screenshots? I don't understand. Did you even try to reproduce this? Did you think about this for more than 5 minutes? Come on. Stop wasting my time. But if on the other hand, the first bug report I see from a testing student is got screenshots and it says, and here's a workaround I tried and it didn't work, and here are 3 other ways that I thought maybe it could work, so I tried those. Then I go, wow, here's someone who's thoughtful. I should read all of their bug reports. I should pay careful attention to the work of this tester. So you've got to know about testability. Here's something else. What's unique about good testing specialists is we question, not assumptions. No, that's too easy. We question safe assumptions. That's why people hate us. Because if you question assumptions, people don't necessarily hate that. You know, like, should we assume that the product is bug-free? I don't think we should. You know, people will go, yeah, that's a good point, tester. Like, no one's going to hate that. We shouldn't assume the product's bug-free. Okay, yeah, let's question that assumption. That's a bad assumption. The problem is when there's a cute little bunny assumption and the tester just smushes it with a hammer. You know, that's when people go, oh, tester, we liked that assumption. We really wanted that assumption to be true, and we're sure it is. Why are you questioning safe assumptions? But questioning safe assumptions is something that is unique, I would argue, about testing. Marketers don't question safe assumptions. No one else questions safe assumptions. A safe assumption, by definition, is one that if you do not question it, people are okay with that. That's what I mean. It's socially safe. That's what I really mean. So a safe assumptions that are acceptable to make without any special management or declaration, even though they might still cause trouble. So obviously, if there are risky assumptions, we can question those, but no one is going to get upset at us for doing that. They will get upset with us properly if we question required assumptions. You might wonder, what is a required assumption, James? Here's an example of a required assumption and what happens when you question it. If I invite Payson here to dinner and he shows up like he did last night, and the first thing I say is, Payson, stealing is wrong. He would probably go, what? I'm just saying, I'm assuming that you understand that stealing is wrong. That you, like, for instance, it would be wrong to rob me during this dinner engagement. I assume you know that. He would go like, of course I do. What are you getting at? Nothing, I'm just questioning. I'm making sure that it's not just an unspoken thing. So, see, a required assumption is one that if you were to question it, you would be considered to be joking or insane or insulting somebody. So testers, we don't question all assumptions. There are certain assumptions that we're just going to go with. I don't come into work every day and go like, do I need an oxygen mask? Is it safe to breathe in here? I go ahead and have faith in a few things. But I have to be careful because there's a line where people will just tune me out. And that's, unfortunately, the line is sometimes way up here. Sometimes assumptions that are pretty safe but not insane or wrong or insulting to question are treated as if it is insane or wrong or insulting to question that. And we testers have to deal with that social dilemma at times. That is a unique issue I find in the world of testing. It's the same thing if you're a bodyguard. If you're a professional bodyguard, you have to be really paranoid about people, and you become a very unpleasant person, but that's your job. Some little girl with flowers rushes up to your client that you're protecting, and you've got to think like, okay, could this be ISIS? Like, what are those flowers? Otherwise, you're not doing your job. But it does make you a weird person. Also, testers study self-deception. Nobody else studies. Everyone else practices self-deception. But they don't really study it. Our job is to study it. Of course, as soon as I wrote this slide, I started wondering, do testers really? Am I just deceiving myself here? So I thought I should think about it a little. What does it really mean to study self-deception? I'm not sure that I have that worked out. So I'm just going to tell you, I'm a little worried that I might have made this one up. But I will put this out there as an idea for further work and examination. That it may be that what makes dedicated tester special is that we study self-deception. We try hard not to deceive ourselves, and we try hard to understand what is it that deceives other people, and we're going to try to undeceive them. As I frequently say, we as testers do not break products. I don't break the software. I break your dreams about the software. That's what I do. That's my job, is to break your dreams, to break your illusions, your unhelpful dreams, let's say. I should probably say that. I break your unhelpful dreams. Just more fun to say I break your dreams. So that means that I study biases, cognitive illusions, framing effects. When people show me things like, here are the acceptance criteria, I immediately think, how is it that these things are worded? What are they not saying? How could these acceptance criteria be putting me to sleep? And how can I wake up and see what really ought to be here? And as a tester, I would say that's just part of my everyday job, if I'm going to be good at it, as a testing specialist. Now I'm ready to talk about role. Let's see, I got 36 minutes left. Okay, good. I'm on good time. Now that I have talked about testing, I've gotten you all, at least, I've put on the table what I think is special and important about testing and testers. I want to talk about roles. This is a definition of role from the Oxford English Dictionary. The aspect of this that I care about is this. I would define role for my purposes as a task associated with a contract. So, in other words, you can be a tester who is not in a testing role. And what that means is you haven't promised anything. That's really key. I'm doing testing, but I'm not promising anything. You know, I live on Orcas Island, up in the San Juan Islands, and I was trying to make my exercise, because I have to exercise or else I'm going to die. So I had to exercise or I'm going to die a little sooner, a tiny bit sooner than I otherwise would. And I'm irrationally attached to life. So I found that walking is boring. Running is a problem for me because I get shin splints. So I found a way to do exciting walking. I pick up trash along the highway. And what happens is that my walking is a side effect from impressing my wife, who loves it that I'm picking up trash on the highway. And then it becomes a game of which things should I pick up? And how big does it have to be to qualify as trash? And what if it's a certain distance off the highway, but I see it? So I'm thinking about all these things and relating it to testing. It's this interesting hunt. And I notice that sometimes there's a beer bottle, but wait, I was here yesterday and this beer bottle wasn't here, but it's an old beer bottle, so I must have missed it. Why did I miss it? It's just fascinating to think through this stuff. But here's the thing. No one's paying me to do this. So it's not like the county is paying me. I'm sure people driving by are like, oh, finally our tax dollars are being put to work cleaning up this place. I actually like that they think that. Like, people should think their government is working well. But I like the fact that I haven't promised anything. That means I can quit at any time. I can do it, I cannot do it. But there's a little problem, which is my wife leaked this to the press. And there was in the local paper a story about me. Now I feel like I got to go out and do this because people are now expecting the litter guy. The litter guy's got to be out there. I haven't seen him in a few days. What's wrong with him? Has he forsaken us? So now it's sort of turning into a contract that I have with it's a little weird. Now my brother and I were having a conversation about the testing role because he works at eBay and he wants to be a tester, but eBay has this weird love-hate relationship with testers, and so he's been all kinds of other roles other than a tester in his career at eBay. And so we're talking about roles, and while we're doing it, we go to the whiteboard and we invented a way of diagramming roles that helped us have our conversation. I want to share that with you right now. This is a task. This is a human. There's no commitment here because a commitment is going to be represented as a box. This is a robot. Okay, this is a task and a contract that is unstaffed. Nobody has accepted the contract, so it's a role without an actor. So I'm going to call the person in a role, I'm going to call that person an actor. So you can have a robot that is doing a subset of testing, a bunch of checking, with a human actor kind of hovering outside but not committing to do testing. I'm thinking that in many cases that is a dangerous situation that's going to lead to a lot of problems, but not in a low-risk situation. You might have a very low-risk situation where you're not making a lot of changes, you're not doing something that's particularly innovative or difficult, and that could be good enough. It goes back to that diagram where maybe shallow testing is deep enough testing for you and you don't need to go nuts with it. And this is a normal tester playing the role of doing testing. So a lot of times, this is me. Whenever I'm testing, I develop software tools that help me do parts of my job. And I think that's great. I'm very skeptical about tools used in testing, but that's not because I don't like them. It's just because I have so much experience wasting my time with tools. So I want people not to waste their time with tools, but that doesn't mean don't use tools. That's just like saying I have experience as a carpenter with people misusing bandsaws. That doesn't mean don't have bandsaws. It means you learn to use the bandsaws better. And I can have many roles. I can be a tester and at the same time be a member of the team. Of course, if somebody has a cardiac arrest right next to me, I don't say, well, is that in the tester's job to perform CPR? No, it isn't. But I am not only a tester, I am also a citizen. And as a citizen, yes, doing CPR is actually in my job description. If I accept the contract, the social contract of good citizenship, which I do, right? So realize that you can be in multiple roles at the same time. And this is partly my answer to people who say, James, I don't understand. Testers should be in charge of helping to create quality. And I say, no, testers never create quality. And they go, but I'm on an Agile team and we're all supposed to create quality. And what I'd say is what you are is you have multiple roles. You are a tester and you are also on the team as a team member. As a team member, you create quality. But in the moment you're doing that, you're not doing testing and you're not being a tester. You have a different hat on. As soon as you switch to testing mode, you're not creating quality anymore. Your job is to understand the truth. That's what testers do. We understand the truth. We don't create the truth, we understand it. It's exactly the same with journalists. You can be a journalist and then you can get involved, but then you become part of the story. And then to the degree you do that, that's not journalism. It might be something else, being a good citizen, but when you put your camera down and save the child from drowning instead of just reporting it, that's not being a good reporter, but it is being a good person. So in other words, I don't disagree that when you're on an Agile team, you create quality. I'm just saying you're not being a tester when you're doing that. You are adopting another role. Why do some people think that roles are fortresses? You know, we hear about the silo thing. I don't get that. I found this picture online that kind of is I guess they think that we don't want to be the tester that goes and closes the door and then drops boiling oil from. Why would you do that? If you define your role as the complete set of the only things you do and you are not going to ever help anyone do anything else, then I suppose that's what you think a role is. I don't think of it that way. I urge you to think of a role as a villa. And you are a socialite hosting parties at your villa. Now, when I invite people over to my villa I don't own, but if I did own it someday, I would like to have parties there. When I invite people over to my villa, they don't live at the villa, but I wanted them to enjoy themselves. So I clean the dishes, I maintain the roof and make sure the doors don't get knocked off their hinges. I upgrade the furniture. I make sure that the refrigerator is well stocked. And that's exactly how I feel as a tester. Come and help me test. But that doesn't mean there's no testing role or the testing role is meaningless. I'm in the testing role, so I make sure the testing happens properly. But anyone at very little energy or cost can come and help me, and I'll make sure you have a fun time testing. I want you to enjoy yourself testing. So if there's anything hard about testing, I'm going to do that. If there's anything not fun about testing, I'm going to do that. You probably enjoy testing, but you probably don't enjoy writing bug reports. Tell you what, I'll write all the bug reports, but please come and help me test. All you have to do is point at the screen and go, I don't like it. And I'll go, thank you. Let me take a screenshot. Let me just look. Okay, go back to testing. I will take care of the paperwork on that. And then your attitude will be, oh, testing is fun. I just have to come and play around. My son helped me test one day, found life-critical bugs in a medical device in a few hours with no preparation at all. He didn't write the report, though. I wrote the formal report. That's what my skill set lets me do. But his skill set, based on years of playing video games and a healthy dose of DNA from certain people, allowed him to analyze things, and he found a way to kill a patient with this medical device. He actually destroyed a $3,000 piece of equipment. I'm so proud of him. Very proud of him. But he doesn't want to be a tester. He doesn't want to be a tester. He said, I don't mind testing when you're around, Dad, but like, I'm just doing it for you. Like, okay, whatever. So he's good at it, casually fantastic at it, and drifts away again. That's the villa, you see. People drop in, help you out, and then they go back to their villa. And you know what? I can leave my villa. I can go over to developer town, and I can try some coding, and someone else will make sure that I don't check in bad code or whatever. I'm glad that they make sure I name my variables properly, and while I'm there, they'll teach me things about development, which I will forget as soon as I go back to my own villa, but that's okay. That's okay. They're the expert. They're the specialist. So you see, instead of silo with no windows in it, think of silo with huge bay windows and French doors. And yes, you live there, but it's not a prison. You can leave. You can come back. That's the attitude that I would like testing specialists to have, specialists of all kinds to have, that is, I think, is completely consistent with Agile. So I'm accountable for the test process, but that doesn't mean I'm limited to it. All right, so my brother and I decided that we can represent this by having a dashed line. The dashed line says other people can come in and do this. So this is like an airline pilot. Sorry, you can't come in and share the task of flying the airliner. It's a closed role. But this is a tester in most cases. Come on in. So what that means is these other people can come in, help me with the testing. Now they leave a bit of a mess, but that's okay. I'll clean up the mess because it was so helpful to have them involved. That's all cool. Now this is cut off somewhat, so bear in mind this link. This is a link to a document that has this information and more on it. And what this is a systematic list breaking down every single element I could think of, and my colleagues who I had review this with me could think of at the time. For what does it mean to be in a role and to be good at it? Here's what I came up with. There are 4 things about being in a contractual style role. You are promising when you say, okay, I am the tester here. I'm going to be the tester, or I am on this test team. What you're saying, I believe, is I commit to doing testing. I will train myself or acquire training to do it well. I commit to being ready to do it. Now, readiness is a little different than competence, because you can have all the competence in the world, but you haven't read the spec, you haven't gotten your tool set together, you don't know where you're sitting. You've got to maintain your efficiency. You must anticipate problems. Here's the big thing that I notice that people who don't have any testers, official testers, and their Agile team, here's what I don't see them do much. I don't see them looking 3 months ahead saying, you know, we're going to need a system to manage our test data, and we better start working on it now. Instead, what they typically do is, I'm developing. Okay, time to do some testing. What do? Oh, I guess I'll write some, use this unit testing framework. I'll write some stuff here. I'll mock up some data. I got to mock up some data. Here we go. And there just is this accumulation of stuff. And right now, the company that I'm working with, this mid-sized software company, the reason they brought me in is they have reached a point of crisis because their testers have just been working short-term, and they've accumulated huge numbers of files, including code and data, And no one knows how the product is being tested. No one tester can say what's going on. And so it's all a big mess now. And this is, I'm going to talk about this in a minute on another slide, but I'll tell you, this is why test managers actually matter. And when Agile said, let's just get rid of managers, they had no idea what problems they were creating for the future. Managers, it turned out, actually did a job that mattered. And now we don't have it. And now, company after company, there's this terrible vitamin deficiency. It's like vitamin C deficiency. And all these companies have scurvy now of a certain kind. And they don't know, they just think, oh, it's these open sores are just because we're not doing Agile well enough. We just have to like become even super Agile. And really, I think they don't realize that the vitamin deficiency is a deficiency of middle-level leadership, which creates spaces within which people can get certain things done, even if there's pressure on them. Because if you don't have that, here's what you work under. The tyranny of the story. Now here's the story. I got to test the story. What do I do after that? Test another story. You're behind on your stories. Keep going. Story, 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 story. What about the stories that you, the tester, should put on that Scrum board? Oh, testers don't put stories on the Scrum board. They should. They should put a whole bunch of tasks on there. I am going to work on my test data infrastructure today. That's a story. Well, how long is that going to take you? A week and a half. Oh my God, no, you can't do that. You have to separate it into smaller stories. Okay, work a little bit on the testing data infrastructure. Work a little more on the testing data. Because I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be. It's a whole design process that I have to go through to figure out how I want to store my test data. So maybe we should have a whole separate Scrum project for it. But you can't just say, Scrum Master, that testing is not allowed to have problems that need to be solved. That's not how you do that. If we don't solve these problems, then it's going to be a huge mess, and that huge mess is going to mean that it's going to be more and more expensive to do shallower and shallower testing, and you're not going to like that. And you're going to wonder, why is testing so slow, and why are we releasing bugs to the field? In other words, you'll have scurvy, and you'll think it was because of bad air or evil humors, but there's a vitamin C deficiency here, and it's that the testers are not protected by anyone who can explain to upper management, here's how we develop testing infrastructure, so then testing infrastructure systematically doesn't get created. Now, I created this set of elements to help reason about the pros and cons of having independent testers. And when you look at the full version of this document, you'll see that I talk about, for every one of these things, cost, requirements, openness. Here are some ways that this problem is usually addressed, and here are some problems that come up because of that. So the document is designed to help you think through roles, rather than as a propaganda document to say, everyone has to have super skilled testers in their team, technical divers in their team. So you'll see that when you look this up. I just wanted to show you a little about what's in that, some of the elements that are in that document. All right, so here's a summary of what I said was unique and all that about testing. Everything I could think of that is unique about testing. I'm concerned that well-meaning amateurs, where did my little thing go? There we go. I'm concerned that well-meaning amateurs want to turn this into either a efficient robotic factory, which you can't turn it into, or some happy-go-lucky kids party of testing, which is the attitude that I feel I get when I read any book called Agile software testing. It's like, oh, it's a big party, let's collaborate, everything gets done. And I'm nervous about that. Of course, testing is an irritating role by design, and we face constant pressure to be nice instead of to be effective, and we've got to deal with that. Now, wait, that might be a biased statement, because I am aware that there are testers who are super nice by nature, and I am not super nice by nature. So to me, be nice is like telling me to climb a mountain. You're pointing at a mountain. I'm like, oh, it's hard for me. I have to really work at that. But I'm aware that there are people who just float on a cloud of niceness, and Yet they are still effective testers. Absolutely. I believe you can be an effective tester and still be very warm and polite to people. So I might be overplaying that point because maybe it's just I'm the only one struggling with that, but I bet I'm not the only one who struggles with that. I think there aren't a whole lot of good testing specialists in the industry, and I think one of the reasons is that good testing specialists tend to leave testing, and there is less and less of a system for creating new ones coming in to the industry. Here's a big trend, and I've already sort of talked about this, so this just summarizes it on the slide. In my view, in the history of testing, and I've been in testing since 1987, I think management abdicated stewardship in the craftsmanship of testing from the very beginning. So it was a problem when I joined. I mean, here's the example. Here's the proof. I joined Apple Computer as the youngest manager in the R&D group at Apple Computer in 1987. I was 20 years old when I was hired as a manager of a test team with no experience as a professional tester or any experience whatsoever as a manager. So, like, how could they do that? Why? The only way they could do that is management doesn't really take this very seriously, right? That they couldn't find anyone or didn't care. I'm very glad, don't get me wrong, I'm glad Apple was stupid enough to hire me, but I don't think that that is an indicator of sophistication and maturity on their part that they would bring in a nutty kid. I mean, part of me wants to say, you're so brilliant, James. They just saw that. Like, no, it wasn't really. It was more that the guy that hired me wanted to mentor someone, and he saw, well, that's a guy that I can really do good because he's so messed up. I think that's what he was probably thinking. So I was a good guy. I was mentorable. I listened to him, and I got better, and I took lots of classes, and that helped. But I think that from early on, management just didn't really understand how to create craftsmanship among testers. Then, when the lean agile people came along, well, mostly agile, but then lean later on, then they just realized, well, there's no craftsmanship here, so let's just destroy test management entirely. Let's get rid of them because they don't do anything in their view. Thus, anyone who was a test craftsman has now lost his or her power base, support base. Now there's no support. My brother has experienced this at eBay, where he was hired originally by a manager who really believed in testing and supported him and protected him. And then that manager went away, and then the new management was like, why do we really need testers when developers can just do testing? So prove that you matter. And that's not a good environment. Then testers become tool jockeys or developer assistants. Their job gets dumbed down, and eventually all their time gets squeezed away. Their disposable time, as it were. So they can't even do good work secretly because their work is seen as factory work. So now they're perpetually stressed all the time. And that's a formula for testing to become a younger and younger activity where people leave it as fast as they can because it's just seen as a clerical stepping stone to the real work, which is to create a startup that is bought by Google. And you keep saying Facebook doesn't have testers as if that's true and as if that proves that we don't ever need any testing. It's kind of like my car doesn't have a smoke alarm, so why do I need smoke alarms anywhere? I'm pretty sure my car doesn't have a smoke alarm. Maybe it does. Okay, now Kate Falanga, when she hears me talk about, Kate Falanga is a test manager in New York City. When she heard me give the first version of this talk, and I said, the testing role is important, and here's why. Specialists are the develop readiness and all this stuff. She said, there's another way to go about it. She says, in my company, I'm the test manager. We don't have any testers, but we do have a test manager. And the purpose of the test manager is to advocate for testing. And that is another way to get at this issue, isn't it? Because you have the test manager occupy the villa of testing, and the whole point becomes not just letting people come in to have parties, but to get people to come in and do the work. But there is someone occupying that role. So that's interesting, and I get she thinks it works for her, and I think it might very well work for her. But I think another way to put her role is it's not test management, it's the testing expert, the local testing expert who mainly does the actual work of testing by coaching and supervising testing parties that other people engage in. Now, New York City is a nice little point to bring up because you all should know about the Triangle Waistcoat Factory Fire of 1911. This is a very important event in American history, in American risk analysis history and regulation history. In that event, more than 200 young ladies were killed, many of them who jumped to their deaths in front of thousands of witnesses to escape this fire. A couple months after that, I found this story in the New York Times. And this story is testimony by the fire marshal who said, you know, there are hundreds of other companies that are just as dangerous as the Triangle Waistcoat Company was, and there's nothing I can do about it. The law won't let me close these places down. Over the ensuing few years, the state of New York put in place landmark, first of their kind, factory safety regulations which persist to this day. So when people wonder, why do we have regulations at all? We have regulations because of stuff like this that happens. Why do trains have automatic brakes? Because in 1893, I believe, there was the disaster in Ireland where some 60 school children were killed by a train slipping backwards down a hill and derailing, and it didn't have automatic brakes. They had automatic brakes, but they weren't using them. The industry wasn't using them because it was expensive. The next day, they were debating a bill in Parliament to make automatic brakes on trains mandatory because these kids got killed. So this is how regulation works in every industry other than gun safety, apparently. This is how industry works. It's called Tombstone economics. That's what they call it, Tombstone economics. So here's the interesting thing about this. If you don't have testers, it's very much like not having insurance. You don't get insurance. Here's the important thing, you see. People will say, what's the ROI of testing? If anyone ever asks you what ROI of testing is, say, I'm not going to tell you what the ROI of testing is. First of all, it's not my job to tell you that, because you who run the business, it's your job to care about this stuff. Not my job to tell you. It's kind of like a kid on a school bus being asked by the school bus driver, why should I use my brakes? Like, it's not my job to convince you to stop your bus. But the twist that I put on it is I say, it's exactly like insurance. You don't buy insurance because of return on investment. You don't buy insurance and go like, okay, so I'm paying $500 to insure my building against, wind and water damage. When am I going to get that money back? How long is it going to be since we have a flood and then I'm going to get rich because of this insurance? That's not how you think about insurance. You think of it as a cost, not an investment. It is the cost of doing business. We're doing this insurance because if something terrible happens, we want to be protected. And the reason we test is if a terrible bug is put into the product. We want to have some chance of finding it before it's too late. That's what testing is It's a form of insurance, not an investment. Once people think about it in the right way, then it just becomes, well, how worried are we about it? And that's where this comes in. Because before this happened, people weren't really worried about young women burning up in factories. They might abstractly understand that that's a bad thing, but they didn't think it was very likely. That's why we as testers need to save those stories that we experience and those stories we hear about of terrible bugs that got by because nobody was focused on the testing. So I track news stories about this, but I also have my own personal stories. The most powerful ones are stories that happen inside your own company, where you say, look at this bug we found. Aren't you glad we found it now instead of later? Aren't you glad I was looking for this and I had the time to look for this? Okay, getting close to the end here. Yeah, got 5 minutes left too. Okay. Why incompetent actors become competent? Where do competent testers come from? I think mostly it comes from seeking self-respect. And if you don't have that dynamic going, then all you have is fleeing of pain, which is not a very powerful or directed heuristic, because oftentimes you're not feeling very much pain. So, in other words, if the tester is only getting better at testing because otherwise they are in some sort of intolerable circumstance, usually you just have to get a little bit better, and then that intolerable circumstance becomes okay. But if you seek self-respect, that is a very powerful move. But how does that happen? Self-study, deliberate practice, making your own mistakes. If I'm helping people to become better testers, I know I can't do that by telling you, here's the right things to do, don't do this stuff, do this stuff, don't do this stuff, do this stuff. That doesn't work very well. What I have to do is create an environment where people will have experiences and they will learn from those experiences faster than if I didn't provide the environment. I think this should be like how young people are taught to drive, for instance. I think we should have driving simulators, and we should have kids texting and driving in the driving simulators. And it's like, let's see if you cannot have an accident. And you'll find that, like, oh great, you don't have an accident all the time when you're doing this, but the reason why I don't text and drive is I almost killed a motorcyclist who I don't think he knows I almost killed him, but I know. And that scared me. It really scared me because it was completely out of the blue. I mean, I just looked down for a few seconds, I look up, and I barely managed to get slow enough to not run over this motorcycle who had just slowed down to make a turn, and I was coming right up on his bumper. I must have been a foot behind him when I finally got slow enough, and I don't know if he noticed, but I just thought that would have changed my life. That would have really changed my life right there, and I really, really don't want that changed to my life. So I have to put this down. I have to keep it down. It has this poison. It's poison. Just keep it away from me. I think if I hadn't had that experience, then I would have just continued thinking, you know, it's just like people talking. People talk to you in a car, and you're fine, right? So why should just using a little handheld device, why should that be any worse? But I've decided it is, but that's from personal experience. So I think you can't tell anyone that. I think they have to have the experience or they won't believe it. I think that's true about so many aspects of testing. That's what we need to do. That's why we need test managers. That's why we need leaders who understand enough about testing and what people need to become good at testing, so that they can craft those experiences and grow these people like they're growing plants. You don't build a tester, you grow a tester. It's an organic process. That's my point. So here's a trend: test craftsmen in the wilderness. The rise of the Omega tester is one element of this. This is the fact that in many companies there's just one tester. In many groups there's just one tester. So testers need support outside their companies in order to be that lonely testers. There are some support mechanisms that are growing out there. Well, this conference is an example of that, of course, but we need like Slack channels and websites, and there are some that are out there. I think we will expect in the future testers will come from strange places. You'll have people who come into testing as older people who have experience as UX people or business people, and they'll become testers at a high level of skill because they have all this other experience. And I think another thing which I live right now, this is the world I live in, is I've created a private enclave for myself. Conclave. An enclave, a conclave. In this case, they're both the same. A private space where I have a Slack channel with my best friends on it, and we love arguing with each other. So no one complains about people arguing. No one calls it bullying because we're all the same kind of bully. So we all like to criticize each other, and we enjoy it because we know that each of us is trying to make the other one better. So we put our work out there, and it gets savaged by our friends. And the whole idea is we're going to criticize it so that when you put it out there in front of people who don't love you, they won't find anything left to criticize. And that private group is so important to me. It's my secret weapon. It's how I feel that I deserve to be listened to. And a lot of you have this feeling, the imposter syndrome. You don't really feel like you deserve to be listened to, but somehow people do. So I'll just leave you with that. Is that there's a solution to that. The solution is develop a collegial network of trusted people who are excited about the things that you're excited about, and you all agree to help each other be good, to develop yourself, because then we will be creating a sustainable, solid foundation for the future of the role of testing, where you can make the case. This is why you should have somebody like me on your team. I'm a real professional. And part of why I'm a real professional, part of how I know that, I feel confident, not just like a silly, egotistical person saying that, is I work at it, and I got all these people backing me up who are looking for flaws in me and helping me overcome those things, and I help them too. I'm part of a professional community of software testers. That's why you should want to have me on your team dedicated to this in my little villa of software testing, which admits other people to come and do testing, absolutely. It's not exclusive, but I will make sure the roof doesn't fall down. I think that could be a very persuasive argument to help professional testing go on into the future, even in the DevOps world and all that. All right, that's my message. You got the link to the materials, and maybe PNSQC will want me to post it somewhere on their website. I'm sure they will figure that out. If you have any other questions or anything, my email address is on there. And of course, I'll answer any other questions, but my time is up. So thank you very much.